Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his troops are engaged in fierce fighting for every single meter of Sieverodonetsk. Ukraine says Russia has destroyed all but one bridge out of the city, leaving few options for anyone hoping to leave. Sieverodonetsk, together with neighboring Lysychansk, are the last main areas in Luhansk province not under Russian control. Ukrainian fighters say they're holding out, but without more long-range weapons and even basic ammunition from the West, the tide could be turning in Russia's favor.
Smoke rising from an industrial area in the city of Sieverodonetsk, the last part still under Ukrainian control. This unverified footage reportedly shows the Azot chemical factory, where hundreds of fighters and residents are said to be taking shelter. Russia is trying to pound the city, along with neighbouring Lysychansk, into submission with heavy artillery. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Russia is throwing everything into the battle.
The occupiers' key tactical goal has not changed. They are pressing into Sieverodonetsk. Severe fighting is going on there, literally every metre.
Local officials say Russian forces have blown up a bridge linking Sieverodonetsk with Lysychansk, cutting off a crucial evacuation route for civilians. In Lysychansk, Ukraine is scrambling to evacuate residents. Many there think it's now time to get out before it's too late.
We have no choice but to leave. I'm sick of just sitting here. Shelling killed a girl in our yard. We've decided to go, but we do hope to come back.
Meanwhile, the west of Ukraine is still seeing Russian rockets too. These images were reportedly taken after a missile attack in the city of Chernihiv. Moscow says it destroyed a large weapons depot there. But for now, Russia's focus remains on the Donbas region. And while Ukrainian forces have stopped the Russian advance so far, Kyiv says it needs more help from the West and has renewed its pleas for more heavy weapons.
DW correspondent Nick Connolly is in central Ukraine in the town of Kropyvnytski. Nick, the fighting seems to be coming to a head in eastern Ukraine, particularly Severodonetsk. Where do things stand there now?
Well, definitely this battle for Severodonetsk has been going on for weeks, and many times before you've had military experts saying that now is the time, now the last few days of Ukrainian control of Severodonetsk, and then we've seen reverses in fortune, the Ukrainians taking a bit more of the town centre, moving out from the kind of industrial outskirts where they'd been pushed back to, but it does seem that now this is the end, or almost the end, for Ukrainian control on that bank of the river. This was Ukraine's last biggest outpost on the northern bank of the Sieverodonetsk river, crucial defensive feature there. And with the news that the Russians have blown up, as we're hearing here in Ukraine today, 2 bridges, leaving only 1 connection across the river, obviously supplying those Ukrainian forces on the other bank will be increasingly difficult, if not impossible. And it looks like Ukrainian commanders might eventually now take the decision to pull back to the other bank of the river, which is a high bank with kind of cliffs, which is more easily defendable and would allow Ukraine to basically cut its losses and to prevent even further human losses, especially in a situation where they're really having to weigh up every bit of artillery, every bit of ammunition that they use, because they're in such a weaker position compared to the Russians in terms of the resources at their disposal. We've heard from Ukrainian sources in the last few days that basically their entire supply of pre-war Soviet-made ammunition is now more or less used up, and all they are using now, all they have at their disposal is either Soviet caliber missiles and artillery that's come from Eastern Europe, from Poland, from Bulgaria, from other NATO members, or now NATO caliber weapons coming from the US, the UK and others. So basically a very difficult situation now where Ukraine's logistics are very, very difficult and crucial basically to them being able to hold on to where they are right now in Donbas.
DW's Nick Connolly there reporting from central Ukraine. Well, Frank Ledwidge is a military analyst and former intelligence officer with the British Army. He joins us now from Oxford, England. Frank, Ukraine says it desperately needs more military hardware, and not just heavy weapons, but basic supplies like ammunition. Just how under-equipped are the Ukrainians at this stage?
They use thousands of shells every day in what has been, since the start and remains essentially an artillery battle. And the problem they face in artillery battles is that every shell that craters a field or wrecks a building and doesn't actually have any tactical effect is a shell thrown away. So what the West is trying to do is give them precision weaponry. And as you say, they're running out of the old weaponry ammunition. The thing is, of course, as we've said for weeks now, they're not getting enough. The amounts they're getting, for example, of rocket artillery, strikes deep into the Russian logistics rear. It's absolutely essential to stop the supply of Russian shells coming forward and strike Russian artillery and headquarters. The gifts and supplies that the West have been supplying are insufficient. They're a drop in the ocean for what's required, to the point, actually, even beyond that, of somewhat derisory, particularly in rocket artillery.
Now, quite a bit of weaponry has been promised by the West. Why is that weaponry not reaching Ukraine faster, Frank?
Of course, some of it it hasn't even left the gifting countries yet. Those which have, some of it is locked in bottlenecks, and there are supply bottlenecks in Western Ukraine, I understand. Some of it has been struck by Russian rocket attacks, although I don't think that's been decisive. And some of it's been eroded away, attrited, as it were, on the battlefield, as will always happen. Because clearly, since we keep telling the Russians, of course, what we're sending, their intelligence officers say, well, OK, we've got 98 M777 howitzers to destroy. We've destroyed however many, and so many left. So we have to stop telling them what we're sending. But anyway, the point is, there are problems with the supply chain, but the biggest problem is the supplies aren't even leaving Western borders in sufficient quantities.
Now, there are concerns about war fatigue among Western countries backing Ukraine. Do you see countries in Europe and North America in particular losing their resolve to help Ukraine win this war?
Oh, that's such an important question. Wars are won and lost primarily at home. We saw that in Iraq for the British, Americans and the others. We saw it especially in Afghanistan more recently. The home front here in Ukraine is secure. There's no question of Ukrainians losing their resolve at that strategic or political level. But as you said there, the real home front is DC, New York, Berlin, Paris, London. That's where the home front is, and that's where the resolve needs to be firm. The risk is, of course, of the West getting bored with this, which is pathetic but nonetheless untrue. And we must remember another thing. Russian information operations are hard at work trying to influence us at that strategic level. So now isn't the time for any kind of defeatism. Now is the time to press on, give the Ukrainians what they want, and show steady resolve at that strategic level to ensure that that home front remains as firm as the Ukrainian front. Because a war lost in Ukraine is a war lost for the West, and we cannot tolerate a failed state with a big army and an angry population in Europe. It's very, very poor for the future. It would be a disaster for us.
Frank, thank you very much for your analysis. That was military analyst Frank Ledwidge there in Oxford.
Thanks very much indeed.
Let's take a look at some other developments in the war. Russia Day ceremonies have taken place in some parts of occupied Ukraine. Military bands paraded in Sevastopol in Crimea, which Moscow annexed in 2014. And Russia's national colors were on show in Mariupol. The port was overrun after nearly 3 months under bombardment. Some former McDonald's restaurants in Russia have reopened under a new name, which translates as Tasty and That's It. Not all customers are happy, though. A protester demanding the return of the Big Mac disrupted the opening ceremony in Moscow. McDonald's closed its 850 Russian outlets over the war.